I'm Claire Parker.
And I'm Ashley Hamilton. And this is Celebrity Memoir Book Club, the podcast where we select official book club recommendations. And instead of reading them, we tell you what's in them and then we meet about it later.
But we do also read them.
Well, instead of you reading them, we make the selections and then we read them and then you don't have to.
Nice.
Anyway, today's official book club selection is Official Book Club Selection by Kathy Griffin. Claire?
Yes.
If you were to write about your week last week, are there any stories that would make the book?
Okay. I'm continuing my tradition of greatest summer of my life.
Oh my God, amazing.
It's taking some casualties.
Sure.
Okay, so I was out dancing, as you do during the summer of your life. And I was dancing so hard that my friend brought drinks to me and my other friend, and I bopped my hand up. And would you believe I shattered the glass upon impact?
I can't believe you have enough physical strength to punch through glass.
Okay, so I was barefoot. And I told Mac, and he goes, there's actually no excuse for you to ever be dancing barefoot at a club. And I said, well, can I just say? And he said, no, you actually can't just say. There is no excuse. And he wouldn't let me explain myself.
Do you want to try here?
It was like a carpeted raised section. It was a platform of sorts. Anyway.
A carpeted club floor?
Well, it was like a DJ booth area. Anyway, I had actually already changed from heels into Birkenstocks, but even that was holding me back. So I was barefoot next to my own Birkenstocks. And I was like very smartly like, well, I better get out of here and just check to make sure that there's no glass in my shoes. So I like tiptoe out of there and I get to a little section and I go to check my shoe to make sure there's no glass in it. And I swear to God, my first thought was, oh my God, there's so much grenadine in my shoe. And I was like, who was making Shirley Temples on the dance floor? And would you believe that it was my blood and it was coming from everywhere?
Ew.
It turns out it was quite a superficial cut. Just toes are quite vascular. I actually have such a funny story about going to the City MD the next day, but I'll save it for the Patreon. But it was one of the weirder experiences of my life. It was very Truman Show. Anyway. Luckily, there was a woman there who had just graduated med school. Shout out to Women in STEM. And she was very helpful. And can I say one little thing about my body?
Yeah.
Part of why it was so gross and such a bloody mess was because she was like, these are just blood clots. Like your blood is coagulating. And even in my drunkenness at 3 a.m., I went, good for you, body.
I can't believe you're coagulating.
But like, you know how women go birth and they're like, I'm so proud of my body and whatever. I was like looking at my blood, trying to fix the situation on its own. And I was like, good for you. It's late. I know you're tired. You're thinned out with the alcohol and you're fighting for my life. And I really had a lot of respect. And then the next day I was so sick that at one point I considered calling my mom because everyone I know was out of town this weekend. And I was just like, who will bring me a bagel? It's an emergency.
I'm sorry I couldn't be here.
It's okay. I popped back up. A little licking, but no worse for the wear. And I'm ready to keep fighting because you kind of have to be able to chalk it up in a summer like this. Sometimes the night wins, you know?
And sometimes the summer of your life, I mean, what do you want it to be? All no blood dance parties?
No, I feel tougher. I feel stronger. The scar tissue, baby.
To think a summer of a lifetime could just be like completely hygienic dance floor is honestly sick.
So I'm doing great. I'm down. I'm up. I'm ready to go. I'm fighting for my life.
Hooray.
And Ashley, if you were to put a story from last week into the memoir, would any of them make it?
You know, it was my brother's wedding, so I feel like I'd have to write a little line about it at least. Otherwise, that's quite rude.
I don't know. We've read memoirists where they've left out entire marriages of their own.
That's so true.
I actually don't think I've ever read a memoir and had a sibling's wedding be mentioned.
Okay, I feel like I've just been like stressing myself out with nonsense lately, and I want to give a shout out to the musicians of the world. I've been to 2 concerts this year with my friend Tommy McNamara, where the lead singer has like led everyone in a group scream, and I'm just like really into therapeutic screaming lately. I did it on New Year's Day. This is like the year of screaming for me, but in a positive way, I believe.
Release, making yourself known. Finally, Ashley's talking.
No one's ever listening to me.
She's always so quiet in the corner, and it's time for her to release all that pent up thought.
I didn't even think about it till now, but this year at New Year's Eve, me and my friend went out to the pier in Greenpoint, and we like screamed into the water, and it was really fucking nice. And then I went to a concert where the lead singer was like, okay, now we all scream. And then this time she had like a 10-minute speech about like the mounting frustrations of society. And then we all just like screamed. And it was Thursday night before I left for a family trip, and I really needed it. I like was almost crying. I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Earnestly, this scream changed my life. And I had a really nice time at the wedding and everything was good. But boy, oh boy, would it have been without that scream? I don't think so. And so my prescription as a woman in STEM, shout out to me, is for you to go do some light screaming.
And I'm not going to prescribe that you learn to coagulate because I know there's some royal inbreds out there who literally cannot. Hashtag, where's Kate Middleton?
Where is she, though? When can we ask?
I'm not asking. I'll get in trouble. Anyway.
Yeah.
Should we start this week's book?
I am excited for this week's book. I want to give a shout out because I think that sometimes when we get a book request quite often and then we cover that book and it's a book that fucking blows chunks, we come at you guys pretty hard. We say, why did you make us read this? And we got a request for this book many, many, many times. And I really actually quite enjoyed it. So I wanted to say, all right, you won this one.
There's a difference in trying to be like punchline funny and just having a comedic and humorous perspective on life.
Yes. And also, I think the wheels come off at the end. I think when she was trying to reach a page limit, I think the last 3 chapters I could have done without. But for the most part, I would say this book was a very solid experience that I am happy to have read.
Me too.
Especially as a comedy gal.
I really related to it. So it's official book club selection by Kathy Griffin. It came out in 2009. Kathy, I think, is around this time in her 60s to date. And I think when this book came out, she would have been late 40s, early 50s.
Yeah, she was born in 1960.
So the foreword, as all great books have to have a foreword, is to Oprah. And kind of the joke is, if you're a zillennial around here, back in the day, there was this woman named Oprah, and she was the most famous emperor in the whole world. And she kind of told us what to wear, what to read, what to think, what to do. We watched her religiously in her church in Chicago.
It was up to her if you get a car.
Yeah.
She also had Oprah's book club, which before Reese Witherspoon, Dakota Johnson, Kendall Jenner,
Emma Roberts,
Kaya Gerber, before everyone had a fucking book club, Oprah was the book club.
Oh, I guess us.
So yeah.
We're kind of a negative one, though. We're like, what's the opposite of getting people to read?
Read less. Listen to us more. Anyway, so Oprah's book club was extremely famous. Getting the Oprah's official book club selection stamp on your book was it. That was the only thing that mattered in publishing. So the joke is that this book is called Official Book Club Selection as a way to trick Oprah's book club into thinking that she'd already picked it.
So it starts chapter 1, The Littlest Gossip Girl. And it's just so cute. She talks about how like her whole life she's always loved to chat. She is the youngest of 5 and definitely a mistake. She's 18 years younger than her oldest brother. And even from the time she was a little girl, she would like run across the street in Chicago. They grew up in a suburb outside. And she would go to this like old couple that lived with their mother and tell them all the gossip going on in their parents' house for the exchange of a cookie. So naturally, I thought it was my job to go next door to these fancy people and try to tell them the most graphic, shocking, and horrible stories I could. I mean, haven't you sold your soul for a good slice of cake?
And she just loves gossip. And her mom would scream at her and say, stop airing out our dirty laundry. Her parents were extremely in love. Her mom was one of 16 and her dad was one of 5.
Which was considered pathetic in the Irish Catholic community. They said, what are you, barren? But actually what had happened, it was the grandmother said after 5 kids, I'm not having any more. Her husband said, well, I'm not wearing a condom. And she said, well, then I guess that's no sex. So he just like moved to the next town and they told everyone that he died. And nobody found out until 30 years later, 20, 30 years later, when he came back sick and needed her to take care of him. And so they had to be like, I guess he's not dead anymore. And the grandmother took care of the grandfather till his deathbed with the rule that he was not allowed to speak to her. So just in silence, they ate dinner. She tended to him. Crazy.
Honestly, insane. Kathy was considered an ugly child, according to herself. A lot of times people mistook her for a boy. She also began binge eating at a very early age. Looking back now, I know I was quote unquote filling the void, a psychologist might term it. Part of it was surely the feeling that in a house with 5 kids, I could have this thing that no one could take from me, my own secret.
Oh, also, her mom was on amphetamines when she was pregnant with Kathy. Because back in the day, they used to think that a woman should only gain 15 pounds with a child, which is like what I think a baby weighs when you add the placenta in. So she was given amphetamines to keep her weight down. And Kathy's like, I kind of think that's why I am the way I am.
I actually think that would make a ton of sense.
She also grew up in a house full of functioning alcoholics. She's like, I never saw anybody fall down, but my parents were drinking from noon till the minute they went to sleep every single day of their lives. And we did have the people that were considered alcoholics in our family, and they were the ones who were constantly getting in trouble and they were falling down and they were acting out. But everybody I knew was just drunk all the time. And because of that, she has never had a drink in her life or done drugs because she has this fear that if she has one sip, it'll take a week and she'll be addicted.
So she was mostly binge eating and watching TV and gossiping with the neighbors. That kind of encapsulates her entire childhood. She was an obsessive consumer of television and pop culture. And so she loved to just kind of rehash the stories that she learned from TV.
And she also says, when it came to the dinner table of my childhood, though, it was probably more important to be full of knowledge and snappy comebacks than food. The great thing about growing up Griffin was that you had to have all your ducks in a row to keep up with everybody's rapier wit. All of our family members were smart and they all read all of the news and they were very caught up on everything from pop culture to the politics. I don't recall a single relative from my immediate or extended family who wasn't up on everything.
In high school, she got really into musical theater. In fact, her parents wanted to send her to a school that didn't have a musical theater program. And she cried and begged to go to the big public school so that she could have a good musical theater situation. And she also in high school was obsessed with being the most everything, which really paved the way for the Kathy Griffin I think we know today. She wanted to be the most photographed person in the yearbook. She wanted in the index. I don't know if you guys went to a big public school, but in the index of the yearbook, they list every page that you're on, and she needed to go to 2 lines. So she joined every club and was obsessed with just participating in activities so that she was in the yearbook a lot.
But she also says when she was younger in Catholic school that the nuns did not like her and she got bullied a lot. It really gave me an education in how to deal with people in authority who have it in for you, something that would occur again years later when I started doing plays and had a director who really hated me. I remember getting my ass kicked by these girls one time when I'd said the wrong thing to piss a couple of the mean girls off. But I just thought if I can keep them laughing, they'll get off my back, and they did. So she really was an anything for attention, make them laugh. People are mad at me, but as long as I get by the skin of my pants and outsmart them later, it'll all work out.
She's really into theater, and she gets an opportunity to be in a commercial that shot at Comiskey Park.
Does that mean a lot to you?
Yeah, because some people would refer to it now as U.S. Cellular Field, and those people are idiots.
And can you tell the class what that would even be?
It's where the White Sox play, sorry.
You're a Cubs fan, but still respect where respect is due for the institutions of Chicago.
Yeah, I wouldn't root for the Sox, but I also wouldn't disparage their home. Anyway, so she was in a commercial where she was an extra, but there was a close-up shot of her and the people who were near her. And so then people around town were like, oh my God, we saw you in that commercial. And it was the taste she needed to be we've got to go to California. So she ends up after high school deciding she has to move to California and be an actress. She knows that there isn't enough going on in Chicago to sustain her. And so she convinces her entire family to move out to LA.
And it was helpful that her eldest brother, Kenny, was already out there and her parents were looking to retire. And he kept saying, oh, it's so great. It's so warm. So they all move out to LA. And this is when we get the chapter, Kenny. My memories of Kenny are perhaps the most difficult part of writing this book. My recollection of him just doesn't line up with those of my family. What follows is my version of my relationship with him. And I've decided to get it out in the open for the first time.
So Kenny is her oldest brother, and she starts off by saying he is the reason she is who she is. He was very encouraging of her superstar dreams.
And he was himself an actor and a musician, and he played in local cover bands. He was a big deal in a small town. He was in a very popular remake of Hair. He was somebody who was a creative that pursued it and was able to make money, but he also was very up and down.
Yeah, and so he got married to a woman named Kathy also.
Who also had red hair.
And Kathy started taking little Kathy Griffin aside and saying, your brother beats me. And Kathy just did not know. Kathy Griffin did not know what to do with this information. She couldn't believe it. This was her older brother who'd encouraged her to move to California and pursue her showbiz dreams. And then one day she saw it and she told her parents and she was sobbing and it really was terrifying.
But what surprised me was that the commotion afterward focused on me, the crying little girl, and not the woman who'd been abused. I was overcome with guilt, and I remember thinking, no, look after her. I saw her get thrown across the room. But Kathy didn't have a mark on her, and she was quickly tamping up the fire with, I'm fine, I'm fine. Kenny, meanwhile, wasn't saying anything, just tapping his thumbnail repeatedly against his teeth.
Kenny would also lay in bed with her and tell her she was pretty. He never touched her.
But he would get in there and start whispering sweet nothings into her ear when he was in his late 20s and she was 12 or 13.
And she was very obviously uncomfortable with this.
And then one day he brought a friend over and she said that they had a really social house. People always were coming and going. And this friend was alone in a room with her and pulls her on his lap and kisses her. And she's so upset that she punches him in front of the whole group. And then later tells her mother, this is what happened. And her mother is so upset that she goes, okay, sleep in our room tonight. And we're going to lock the door. And then tomorrow we'll tell him never to come back. But years later, Kathy approaches her mom and is like, I'm so angry that you let him stay in our house. This upset me for so many years that in my 20s, I confronted her about it and yelled, how could you have let him spend the night in our house after what he did? My mom burst into tears and said, I'm sorry, I didn't know what to do. We really didn't know what that was. She was trying to explain to me that that kind of behavior was something you saw on the news or happened to other families. She obviously didn't know how to process it.
She ends up telling one of her other brothers, and years later, he contacts him to just scream at him and say that he's disgusting. And then that guy comes to one of Kathy's Groundlings shows, like she's doing improv at this point, and he comes to her show to try to talk things out with her. And she says, do not ever contact me again.
So Kenny has this wife, Kathy, that he ultimately gets divorced from, and then he has another long-term partner. And Kathy, hears from both of these partners of his that he is a pedophile. They both claim that they have caught him with multiple minors, that they have walked in on him. He was a landlord in LA and he had used his extra key to like come onto these preteens in their own homes. And he would claim that they came onto him first. This caused a great divide between me and the rest of my family, resulting in everything from separate holiday gatherings in one day where Kenny saw the family first and then I saw the family second, to the mere mention of his name by anyone else in my family setting me off. She said for her that in addition to what he had done to her and like the fact that his friend had kissed her, she's like, that's all the evidence I need.
Yeah, so she cuts him out entirely and refuses to ever speak to him again. But her family just doesn't fully believe her. They say, you're exaggerating, you're being overly dramatic. He's the only oldest brother you'll ever have, but I took a hard line. My crusade continued in the form of years of arguments with my parents.
So he ends up kind of just mooching off of some other woman. And then in what seemed like an instant, either she kicked him out or he left. He was homeless and hooked on crack. It was devastating to watch the effects this had on my parents.
She eventually sees him on the street begging for money at one point.
On her way to an audition.
And she doesn't pull over.
She just has a really hard time with his manipulation, just coming back to her parents, always begging for money. At one point, he robs them.
Finally, one time her dad flat out says, are you a pedophile? And Kenny said, well, I do what I do.
After Dad told me this, he said to me, so you can take that whichever way. Huh? I do what I do? Dad, I responded, my jaw on the floor. If someone accused you of having sex with children, your answer would not be, I do what I do. Your answer would be, that's outrageous. Anything but I do what I do. And that's where my family and I reached our separate peace, because that was the moment they stopped dogging me for separating from Kenny. Something must have finally clicked for my family. Not enough to admit it to themselves, but enough not to fight me about it. So, and then it turns out her other siblings wouldn't even let him meet their children. As it turned out, later in life, Kenny admitted to my parents that he'd been molested by someone associated with his junior league baseball team. And we all now think a cousin of ours who used to babysit Kenny might have molested him too. This cousin went on to become a priest who got moved from parish to parish each time he was caught with a kid.
Yikes.
So, I mean, there's a lot of layers of abuse there.
I'd be lying if I said Kenny wasn't a big influence on me. I don't do drugs. I'm not homeless. I'm not an addict. I know what serious fuck-ups look like. Kenny turned down a job for voiceover one time. I would do that voiceover. Kenny called in sick to hair all the time. I think don't ever miss a performance. That's a form of influence for sure. Negative perhaps, but an important one nonetheless. This chapter, I was just very sad and impressed by her, because I think that going against your family like this while also maintaining a relationship with the people that raised you is so difficult, but she never let up on her hard line. And I think that that is very admirable.
Her final concession to her parents is he eventually dies of pneumonia, and her parents say, please, like, just go say goodbye to him. So she does that for them. And she says, as he's lying there and so weak and in that state, she was able to forgive him for what he had done to her. But she's like, I can never forgive him for what he might have done to other people. That's not her forgiveness to give. But it seems like her and her parents are able to really bounce back from that.
They really do bounce. Okay, so this next chapter is about her relationship with sex, basically.
Especially right when she moved to LA. So she was 19 when she moved, and she lives with her parents until she's 28. So they're all kind of new to LA, and she's young, and she's a virgin, and she's quite naive.
Throughout this, though, she's calling herself a whore quite a bit. She starts the chapter by saying, I wasn't always a whore. And now she's grown into quite a promiscuous person. Throughout this book, she loves to refer to the amount of donut shop employees that she's fucked. And I do think that this, to me, is something that I don't quite care about, because this book has so much honesty that is still written in her voice, that then when she like feels the need to provide you her character, that I'm just like, okay, yeah, sure, you're a big old slut.
I guess at the time back in the day, to call yourself a slut was like something.
Yeah.
I just feel like, to me, you want to break boundaries, be a prudent monogamy had.
Totally.
But anyway, the other big thing is, so she goes and she starts taking acting lessons, and then she goes to the Groundlings for the first time, and she's immediately like, well, this is where I need to be.
She goes up to Phil Hartman. She sneaks, I think, into the back after the show and goes up to Phil Hartman and says, how do I do this? And he says, well, you can start taking classes.
And she's like, he literally sat down for 10 minutes and explained everything to me.
So she does 2 years of acting school and then she goes, okay, that's not really for me. And then she starts taking groundlings classes.
And she just is really eking it out. She's trying to get her SAG card. She's going out for extra work. She realizes because of that commercial she did in the White Sox situation, because she was a featured extra in it, she's able to get her SAG card and her mom and her dad pay for it. So she has like a lot of people helping her out, but she's still just in the trenches going to acting school. She did the Lee Strasberg method. She's going to groundlings. And then she has this long period where she talks about the process. And it's the same thing, I think, for UCB, all of them. You do class 101, 201, 301, 401, and then you can join one of their like house teams, but there's like a hierarchy amongst the house teams. So here it was the Sunday night group. And then from the Sunday night group, you got to graduate to Friday and Saturday night. And she goes, I was in the Sunday night group for longer than anybody has ever been in the Sunday night group.
Probably then.
Yeah, now it's a much bigger deal. But she's like, I was in it for 2 years at max. Everybody else was in it for 1 year. And then people would come in and within 3 weeks get promoted. And I was just eking my shit out.
Yeah, and there was several ways to kind of not get brought in because it's based on talent, it's based on sketch and character writing ability, but it's also based on people liking you and wanting you in the Friday and Saturday night groups. And it seems like she did have friends in comedy, but I also wonder if she was kind of annoying.
Yeah, I mean, she seems crazy.
Yeah.
I'm like, I like her, but I
get why you'd be a little put off if you're in like a crew with her.
She also says she wasn't a character person. She could only ever play herself or her mom or her dad. So she wasn't really cut out for improv comedy, I think. And she was writing her sketches. But at the end of the day, she could only ever be herself, which isn't really what they want. At the same time, she's struggling with a binge eating disorder and she's binge eating and binge exercising. So she would go eat as much as she could and then do like 3 straight hours of step aerobics. She finally ends up at Overeaters Anonymous. And she says going to therapy and just finally realizing that magical number in her head that she's always trying to reach, like it could just be higher.
Yeah. There's no reason for her to be 110 pounds. That's just made up.
And it's interesting because she doesn't super talk about it again and throughout the book. But there is this honesty about living in LA and trying to be a performer and especially up to like a few years ago, you just do kind of have to have a little bit of an eating disorder to look the way you need to look to be allowed on TV.
I guess the problem is that I think it's mostly still true.
Yeah, but I do think at least now people try to pretend that it should be different. Back in the day, she's like, I don't know, agents would come up to me and go, you need to get a nose job, you need to lose 10 pounds. Like the fact of the matter is what it takes to be on TV is like a low level eating disorder at least.
Yeah, it is just like really true. And she talks about it in a way that is pretty frank. Later in the book, her body comes up again because she gets quite complimented on it. And you can just hear how proud she is of herself. And that just is what it is. For years, women are just told your body isn't enough. And so if people say, actually, your body is good, it wasn't a good chapter of the book, but I get why it was in there because her brain couldn't get past it.
Also, I mean, so much of her personality is trying to be pretty. And I think it doesn't come across as much in this book in terms of like how many pages it takes up. But when you think about what she has gone through and what she has done to try to become more conventionally attractive,
yeah.
Like she just takes it for granted that she was an ugly kid. She almost died on the table because of plastic surgery. And then she went back for more. Like she just is addicted to trying to fit in.
Mm-hmm. So she's in LA. She's in the groundlings. She isn't having very much mainstream, or not even mainstream, but financial and industry success at all.
But what she takes from it is that I was just going to have to work harder. I have to be so good. I thought that this director has to put my pieces in. But because no one wanted to work with me, I had to learn to write monologues. After writing and writing and writing bad pieces, then mediocre ones, then good ones, but not good enough stuff, I finally hit upon my first successful character. So she finally gets one character that does well. It's definitely like not a character that would be well received these days. But anyway, she is somebody who never takes no for an answer.
Yeah, she doesn't take no. She says, go back and rework and try again. So she starts finding more success in commercials, which gives her a little bit more financial stability. And she's also teaching groundlings at this point.
But she's also talking about like the hypocrisy and the chicken egg problem of trying to make it in the entertainment industry, which is in order to get hired for SAG roles, you need to be a SAG actor. In order to be a SAG actor, you have to already be in SAG roles. In order to get an agent, you need to get work. In order to get work, you need an agent. It's just like all of these things. And she talks a lot about how at the end of the day, nobody's going to do it for you but you. And she's like, I used to have this idea that an agent would finally see me and help me get work. All they really do is let you get your own work and then take 10%.
Yeah. There's a lot in this book about just the ways the industry is fucking goofy, in that there are certain things you need to do. There are certain people you need to have in your circle.
I mean, later she pitches My Life on the D-List, and the only reason it gets a go is because her agent came with her to the meeting.
And her agent was friends with the network executive.
Yeah, but like meanwhile, he didn't help come up with it. He didn't help do it. He didn't build out her act for 20 years. Like everything that made the show, he had no part of. But if he hadn't been in the room, they wouldn't have said yes.
Exactly.
And that's worth 10%.
So she's also always been just someone who will say whatever she thinks is the funniest thing there is to say.
So she does the thing that me and Ashley always complain about, where she talks about the actors and actresses who are like, I spent 6 months just living in my car before I got my Oscar. And she says, cry me a fucking river, Hilary Swank. You star in Karate Kid movie at 19 and win 2 Oscars by 30. Go fuck yourself. Sometimes you read about stars who can look back and realize it was shocking how quickly it happened for them. Corbett is like that. He started off as a hairdresser when I was at the Groundlings, and then one day he went to a show and had someone run up to him and be like, give me your thing. But she's like, for me, I had to really work at it. And I have to say, she did have to fucking work at it. She was like eking it out for a while.
Yeah, like I said, she was teaching Groundlings classes. She was doing the Groundlings show. She finally started getting commercials. And this is where you really start to see the Kathy Griffin-ness has always just been there. And she's just doing it and doing it and doing it until someone likes it. On this commercial set, there's a director who's famously very difficult, and she just rips him a new one. But then it turns out he likes that about her. So she's like, okay, that's fun. And she gets in the habit of just kind of letting loose. And it turns out not everyone likes that about her. She's like, I had some really intense positive reinforcement pretty early that I just never really learned my lesson about who it was okay to be a bitch to. Honestly, if you guys are interested in the comedy scene in LA in the 90s, I mean, pick up this book. There's a lot of fun stuff about who she was hanging out with.
She was with Lisa Kudrow. And she even says, here I was saying that doing characters was my thing, but Lisa Kudrow gave it to me straight. You're okay with characters, she said, but you're really funny as yourself. When you talk to me as you're funnier than anybody I know.
So her friends convince her to try stand-up. And at first she's like, I just don't even know what that means. This feels crazy. So she asks if she can start monologuing before the Groundlings shows. And she's allowed to do 5-minute monologues. And then she ends up doing like 5, 10, 20-minute monologues.
But she starts to get good feedback. And then she starts going to the Comedy Store and going to the improvs. And then I bombed for 2 years. She has one great set and then she just bombs for 2 years, which is very typical. I feel like a lot of people have like a first great set. And if you quit right after and say, well, I scratched my itch just as I thought, I'm a really great stand-up comedian. Good for you. Try it a third time.
She also talks about the humiliation practices of the open mic at the improv in the Comedy Store. And the way she describes it in this book is true up until 2017, which is when I left LA. So I don't know if it's changed. I doubt it. But it's so crazy that there's this like bullshit rigmarole and they just don't change a goddamn thing.
Lisa Kudrow, Judy Toll, they just keep saying be yourself. And they tell her about kind of the more alt comedy scene that they're like, listen, you can't just get up there with guys talking about jerking off. You have to go somewhere where people are open to what you're doing.
So there's this show called Uncabaret, which is more of a storytelling, like alternative format where you don't have to be just like punchline, 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 punchline. And this is much more up her alley. So her and Margaret Cho and a couple of other people,
Janine Garofalo,
they start a show called Hot Cup of Talk, which is a regular show that they use the Groundlings space for. And they're able to do these longer sets each week that become quite famous. Laura Keitlinger is there. Dana Gould comes sometimes.
The scene was a breeding ground for hackery. I knew people who would scrape together 10, 15 minutes of material, do it over and over from club to club and get $1 million television development deal. I didn't know how to write a one-liner to save my life, and I still don't. So they come up with this show, and the rules are you can't ever do the same joke twice, and you would do an egg timer, and just set it for 15 minutes, and then talk, and then bring up the next comedian. And she said it started to become like such an alt scene hit.
People were really excited to come out to the show. It starts getting some attention.
Janine's big line to me was, Kathleen, you can't possibly care what the audience thinks. It's so liberating to think that. It doesn't mean you don't want the audience to laugh. It means you're driven by what you think is funny.
She ends up dating Jack Black for a little bit. They were part of the same little comedy scene.
So there was this guy, Dave Rath, and he was a talent manager, and he shared a house in Laurel Canyon with a couple comedians, and that's where everyone partied. Jay Moore lived next door. Andy Dick, Janine, Bob Odenkirk would all come hang out. Dave Attell, Judd Apatow, Patton Oswalt, Conan O'Brien. Janine had the cool factor with the guys. Sarah was the one they all wanted to marry, that's Sarah Silverman. And I was the pesky flea.
I mean, this I find very interesting because she also talks about how some of these people in public now will not acknowledge her. Jack Black, they dated for a little bit, and she says he fully ignores her on red carpets, and she's kind of nice about it. Nowadays, when I see Jack, it's on the red carpet, and it's like high school all over again. He won't say hi to me. Maybe not out of any choice in his part. I don't think he's trying to be rude. I get it. The guy's a little busy these days. Huge movie star, wife, kids, the whole thing. Let's face it, he's an A-lister. This made me really suspicious of Jack Black.
Inevitably, though, I started to lose friends to fame. I learned a lot about what happens when someone goes from not being famous to being famous very quickly. Janine got so hot, she wasn't just well-known. Girls wanted to be her. I remember visiting Garofalo at the Chateau Marmont. There were flowers everywhere. I wasn't getting flowers, and I've been from donut fryers. I went from seeing Molly Shannon all the time to then she was doing SNL, and I didn't see her for years. The drift occurred with Cho, too. She had been doing Uncabaret and Hot Cup of Talk constantly, and then all of a sudden she got her own ABC show. When you're on a television show, you've got to lose the weight, get a trainer, take fen, and you can't stay up till 4 a.m. because you've got to be at work at 8 a.m. And then this made me so sad. It happened to Lisa Kudrow as well. And she talks about how when they met, they were doing the groundlings and nothing was happening for Lisa. And she finally said, one day, I'm going to dye my hair blonde, I'm going to get a nose job, and I'm going to get fake boobs. Well, it helped change her career overnight. She got Mad About You right after that, and then Friends.
Her career just took off into the sky. I remember in the week or so after Friends premiered, we ran into each other at the mall. And she said, I think the show is actually going to end up being pretty good. That's so sad that Lisa Kudrow, who is a genius.
Dude.
I mean, when you see the comeback, right?
The comeback is like, if I could have done anything, I would have done the comeback.
Okay, don't come for me. I think Lisa Kudrow is stunning. On Friends, she is not the hot one.
Yeah.
And in order to be not the hot one, she still had to get plastic surgery and lose weight and dye her hair. That sucks.
It really did make me sad.
Yeah. Like, she's not there as the beautiful person. I'm not saying she isn't beautiful.
Yeah. As I was saying with Kathy's eating disorder, it's like just to get in the room.
Like, she oozes talent. She is so incredible. And the fact that no one would look at that until they felt she fit a mold sucks.
So then things start going up for her. And finally, like 10 years of scraping together, she starts getting guest star work. And she's in one of the early episodes of Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. She talks about Will Smith and she says they barely talked all week. And then right before the show actually filmed, he would go around to everybody's dressing room and like muck it up so that you felt like you had rapport. And she goes, he was extremely charming. Even though he was new to television, he clearly had a sense of knowing when to turn it on and with whom. And then she talks about Ellen DeGeneres. She was on a guest spot with Ellen DeGeneres' sitcom Ellen in the mid-90s. She was a little bit more known, and still Ellen was awful. So mostly at this point, Kathy Griffin was known for that commercial she did where she danced around to play that funky white boy, I guess. And Ellen sees her and goes, do the commercial. And she had to perform the commercial in front of everybody. And she said it was so tense on Ellen's set that everybody looked at Ellen and you only laughed when Ellen laughed. And if Ellen laughed, you better start laughing too. And she was like, it was such an interesting lesson in the top star sets the tone for the whole show. And I'm just like, fucking Ellen, you've been a bitch since the beginning.
Yeah, maybe your show got canceled because you were just a bitch.
She talks about other abrasive stars. Thomas Hayden Church apparently is a dick. I actually already knew that.
Oh, she dated Quentin Tarantino for a second.
And also she worked with George Clooney on ER and said he is so charming and makes you feel so at home and is so kind. And he's who introduced her to Quentin Tarantino. She did an episode of Seinfeld and Jerry was not nice to her. She wanted him to sign something for this charity event she was going to. No, it was not. It was a watch party.
Oh, it was a watch party. Okay. It wasn't a charity event, but it was still, sorry, just autograph the fucking piece of paper, Jerry. She just wanted to like show off to her friends at a watch party that night. You know, I still hate Jerry. I know. I know. She ends up really forgiving him, but still. Unfortunately, in this book, he does come off very funny. Yeah. I'm not saying he's not funny. I wish he could be funnier, you know, if things weren't so PC these days. I know. He has some really hot takes on stamps and hot dogs at a ballpark that just are too spicy for college students. I mean, what is the deal with Pop-Tarts? Don't say that. We'll get shut down by the FCC. You take that word back. Anyway, so she ends up putting this story in her HBO special, and then he sends her like a very funny letter being like, I heard that you did something and talked about my like incredibly successful television show. And they could just kind of have a back and forth and rapport where he's always goofing off with her. Anyway, the funniest thing about all of this is she starts getting all these roles, and the number one thing she has put into every one of her contracts is that her parents have to be allowed to come onto set. Yeah, her parents love visiting her on set. I thought, what good is it if I can't bring my parents? It's cool I got the job, but way more fun that they got to meet Clooney and see Quentin work, which is so cute. And I guess everybody loves them and they're just like dazzled to be there. That's so goofy. So then she gets Suddenly Susan.
Which you may remember from other memoirist Brooke Shields. And if you haven't thought to listen to that episode yet, check it out. It's cuckoo bananas.
It's so funny because Kathy Griffin's whole shtick is just being like, here is what I really know about celebrities. And I'm like, oh my God, validated. Everything we've thought is true. She's on Suddenly Susan. She finally gets a series regular position on a primetime network sitcom. She plays the funny friend or like the secretary. And it came down to the last second.
They did not want to hire her.
Everyone in Hollywood apparently was auditioning for this role. All of her contemporaries had gone out for it. And they're like, why haven't you gone out for this role? They kept on just not having it. Eventually they did hire someone, but they had to drop her before they shot the pilot. Like the Friday before they were set to film on Monday, they called Kathy Griffin and were like, fine, you can audition.
But she says her and Brooke became very good friends. She says Brooke is like the most beautiful person she's ever seen in real life. It looks like she's already wearing makeup even when she's not. But she says she had beautiful girl disease, which was she was so sad that she wasn't the funny one. She resented that I got laughs. I just couldn't believe it. I wasn't trying to be a cover girl, for Christ's sake. I remember saying to her one time, isn't it enough that you're beautiful and perfect and wonderful and guys are in love with you and you're starring on a show and the head of the network is kissing your butt and you're rich and successful? I'd be happy to have one of those things. And on top of that, you want to get the laughs? Can't I just have this one thing? She left at that reasoning and thankfully it eased the tension.
That is so funny. They have another kind of scuffle. Their relationship has a bit of a rift because Brooke Shields' marriage, details of it get leaked to the press, and Brooke believes that Kathy is talking about her marriage in her stand-up, which unfortunately, this one I'm on Brooke's side.
Well, I think she was, but I do think she's like, I wasn't telling People magazine, but she also says, so Brooke's boyfriend, she was still married to Andre Agassi, but her soon-to-be husband, Chris, was visiting her on set frequently. And she's like, well, your boyfriend comes twice a week to visit you in your dressing room. This is a working company. Are you sure it's me?
Yeah. No, that's true.
But it's really interesting to hear from Kathy how famous Andre Agassi was.
Yeah. Apparently Brooke was
like the second there.
Yeah. Andre had way more money apparently. And Kathy is sitting here being like, I can't figure out the math. Why would Andre Agassi, a tennis player, have more money than Brooke Shields, a celebrity for the last 15 years?
And she says it's that world where as gorgeous and famous as Brooke is, there was nothing like that Agassi cred. He was the guy who, when he came to the set, everyone would freeze. Suddenly, the heads of the network studio were there. Guys who rarely spoke to Brooke were suddenly stumbling over themselves and losing their shit. And bromances were sprouting all over the place. Men were practically crying. My straight guy friends who could barely remember the name of my TV show were asking me about him. I remember thinking, calm the fuck down, he plays tennis.
That's so random.
I really can't believe it. I guess he had one of those giant $100 million contracts. But she says Brooke would be so funny and fun. And then Andre would come around and she suddenly went into wife mode. And like you couldn't make any jokes because she would not laugh. And she'd be like, okay, when you meet Andre, don't curse because he doesn't like cursing right now. Kathy would be like, okay, well, I'm 36, so I don't really care what he likes.
She gets into the guests that they had that were fun. And then we get into the death of their castmate, David Strickland, which, again, we read about in Brooke Shields' book. Him and Brooke were very close. This section I thought was very sweet and interesting. She talks about David's addiction and just not really understanding the depths of addiction and what could happen and kind of just not taking David's problems very seriously. She just kind of was like, I don't know, he'll get sober eventually.
She also talks about the fallout amongst the cast of how to deal with the grief. She says, his suicide was a very divisive issue for the cast. I completely understand now why married couples get divorced after losing a kid. I make no judgment calls, but I can say it's a weird thing to reconcile the way others grieve.
Okay, so this is something I want to queue up for later. I do think it's very fascinating that when Kathy Griffin is faced with genuine human complexity, she has the ability to be very compassionate, but sometimes I feel like she really doesn't know where the line is. Like, I do agree that sometimes she crosses a line. There are times where I think that she doesn't see why what she's saying is more of an issue, and like the celebrities she's talking about are people if she hasn't met them.
Yeah. Well, I think her line is very superficial, and I mean that in terms of like, when somebody's dead, that's obviously a problem. When somebody's on suicide watch, that's obviously a problem. But there's never like a deeper understanding of the complexities of like, just because somebody's pretty and winning awards doesn't mean that there's not a problem. And I think it comes from like her own
insecurity.
Not even insecure, like I guess ultimately at some place that, but like her own psychotic ambition, whereas it doesn't matter how badly she's getting pummeled in the press as long as somebody's talking about her. I feel that she has such like a mental illness in terms of her addiction to fame and success in her career that she almost can't fathom. Like she just doesn't believe in her soul that somebody who's successful could be unhappy or like that there could be genuine problems there.
Yeah. I agree.
Like, I think if she was in a conservatorship that garnered a $50 million Vegas residency deal, she'd be like, well, what's the problem? I don't need my freedom. I have my residency. Do you know what I mean? Like, there really is something, because she never got to some kind of like level of safety. I don't think she believes that anybody successful, she cannot look at Brooke Shields and think, why do you want to be liked for being anything other than beautiful?
Yeah.
And that thing, I do kind of agree with her. I am like, all right, Brooke, sorry, you're just the star of the show, not the comedic relief. You can't be everything. I guess you should have tried being funnier. You're just probably not funny, and that's just something you have to live with. That doesn't mean you're bad. But I don't think Kathy can see the alternative.
Totally. Because of Suddenly Susan's success, she gets to start doing some talk shows. There's a lot of self-deprecation in this book.
We were saying a lot of Claire and Ashley disease is present.
Sometimes we see someone say something, we go, oh, there's my problem. Oh, hello, mirror.
Oh, is that how I sound? Oh.
Well, that's unlikable, isn't it?
Yeah, in short, Kathy Griffin has this problem where she thinks everybody's out to get her. And it's a two-pronged issue of, one, sometimes not everybody's out to get you, just they're not thinking of you because you're not that famous or successful. And then the other prong is, or maybe they don't like you because you did something insane and unlikable. And not everybody has to like that you did whatever you could to get attention at the expense of anybody around you.
Yeah, so she talks about doing a bunch of talk shows. And then she has a line where for most of them, she'll say, and then I guess I got banned because I said something crazy because then they didn't have me back for 10 years. And it's like, well, maybe also you weren't famous enough that for Suddenly Susan, you would do this talk show several times. And then it wasn't until you had another thing to talk about that you got asked back. So she doesn't get asked back to Letterman.
She very much is not in the boys' comedian club.
Yeah.
I think a lot of her resentment comes from that, seeing probably equivalents get to do talk shows to promote their special or whatever, but not her.
Yeah.
And I get that, but also I am like, you do yourself no favors.
At this time, so this book, obviously she's airing a lot of laundry, which I have a fun time with, go to town. But her whole act for years was talking about celebrities that she's met, talking about you could not have an interaction with her that wouldn't maybe go into one of her specials.
And also her thing is, so for one example that she talks about being banned from Regis and Kathy Lee, and she really is banned. At first she was going to blame Kathy Lee, but then Kelly got on there and it turns out she couldn't do it with Regis and Kelly Ripa either. And then finally she's like, I guess I got banned because when I did host it for a couple of days in a row, I looked at Gelman, the executive producer, and I said, Gelman, you're just Regis's bitch.
And I'm like, yeah, if the executive producer, if you're mean to him
on air,
you just don't always get asked back.
And I feel that's very, like, it's very mean to Ashley to be like, oh, what? I can't just insult you to your face and then do your show?
Hello. It's also very us to be like, okay, so for 5 years, I couldn't go on Kimmel.
Oh,
why?
but Zendaya can. Oh, okay, that seems a bit rigged, no? What's she doing? Oscar award-winning projects? We have a podcast in Ridgewood. I think it gets a good amount of listeners.
Okay, I'm pretty sure you've had the guys from Smartless on your little TV show.
I'm sorry. Are you telling me they're more famous than us? Sexism. You must be banned because we're too poignant. You're too scared of our crazy mouths. What will they say next? We speak too much truth to power. Sorry, I'm not Jason Bateman or the other ones.
Old Sheldon.
Oh, what? Because I didn't used to fuck Amy Poehler? I can't be on your little late night show? Nobody watches that shit anyway. Have another drink, Jimmy.
Sorry that I don't have a fake tan.
Have another drink and lip sync, all of them. And that's why we're banned, because we're just too fucking spicy. So in that way, we're a lot like Kathy Griffin. We're banned in the way that we're not invited. And we're not invited in the sense that nobody had ever heard of us.
She feels personally insulted by the ones who she knew from way back when who don't invite her. So Conan O'Brien doesn't have her back.
Conan O'Brien, she thinks it's personal because they tried to go on a date once, but he never once liked her. And then she tried to go to a wedding with him and he like showed up after he thought she would have left. And then she's like, so I guess that's why he never wanted me on the show. She just wasn't famous enough.
Yeah, it also seems like he doesn't like her. Oh my God, she also tells a story about Steve Martin being an asshole, which I do believe.
Can I say her story seemed pretty benign? He just seemed like a jerk. It seems like it's corroborated by the general beliefs of people who have met him.
But that's, I think, what made this story so believable to me. It didn't seem personal. He did just seem benignly a jerk. He just like wouldn't speak to her during the commercial break. And she's like, what the fuck is up with that? And I do have to say, what the fuck is up with that?
I will say the most shocking thing in the world was they asked her to fill in for Kathy Lee for 3 days to host with Regis and didn't pay her a fucking dollar and said like,
it's good promotion.
And then Oprah asked her to come out and do a full episode about all of her plastic surgery, which we'll get to later. And she goes, they put me up in a fucking Holiday Inn motel and paid for one economy flight and wouldn't even fly out anybody from my team. That's cheap shit. That's a domestic ass flight. Oprah. Can I say no good billionaires? They're all hoarding.
They're all hoarding. She starts going on the road for stand-up a lot. There's not a ton of stories here. She just has a really insane experience co-headlining with Andy Dick. He used to do a lot of drugs and drink a lot of alcohol and was not a reliable co-headliner.
Okay. Unfortunately, this next chapter is actually hard to look at. It's about all of her fucking plastic surgery. And she says, trust me, if you're watching TV or a movie and you see a pretty lady over the age of 17, she's gotten some shit done.
Oof.
So then she goes into her plastic surgery. She got her nose job when she was 26. She said everybody just was like, you have to get one. Every single agent was like, you just have to get a nose job. And then she goes, I got one. And then I never got work.
So it turns out she needed more than a nose job.
But she will say, listen, everyone acts like it's no big deal. She goes, it's fucking surgery. They put you under and it hurt like hell and took me a couple weeks to recover. But it was like brutal.
That's the thing that I always feel like people need to say. I'm so sick. I'm furious with anyone who gets on social media and says that they got work done and then they like went out partying the next weekend. One, that's so fucking dangerous. And I'm just waiting for one person to have a negative side effect from that because it will happen. I'm sorry. The way there was this one girl who got a boob job and was like, I wasn't in pain the next day, so I still went to the club. And it's just like, don't fucking do that to your body. That's disgusting. Not getting a boob job. If you want to get work done, but don't act like it's not surgery. And surgery is bodily trauma. And it's fine to do it if you want it, but stop acting like it's not a big deal because there are people watching it saying, like, I went and got a nose job consultation because I was like, I don't know, I've seen one too many videos where people are like, I don't know, you just get a nose job. So I went and I was like, what if I just got a nose job? And it's like, no, why would I get one? For what? Who would like me more if I just had a different nose?
Anyway, so then she's like got her overeating problem. She kind of gets a handle on it. And then what's the next logical step? Liposuction. So she goes, she's like, the problem is, you go in and they just start telling you what's wrong with you and they take the marker and they like write everything on your body that jiggles. And so they're like, what are your problem areas? And then we'll tell you your other problem areas. So they go in, they're like, we'll do your inner thighs, outer thighs, back of your legs, and your knees.
If someone said that I needed a liposuction on my knees, I think I would have a full-on meltdown. Anyway, so she gets it done by just some hack job.
She goes, you know, a lot of these plastic surgeons are just EMTs with an extra course. And I'm like, that's actually not true.
That should not be true.
There's a lot of actual just plastic surgeons and you should be going to a fucking accredited doctor.
Yeah. So she goes home and she can't pee and she's in horrible pain. So she calls the doctor's office and they send a nurse to give her a catheter. The next day she can't pee still. After a week of every single day having to get a catheter, in and out, like not even staying in, she goes back to the doctor. She's doubled over in pain. It turns out there's another person there to get a facial who is a actual doctor.
And he goes, what do you mean you can't pee? He goes, you need to take this girl to the ER right now. Take her yourself or I will sue you.
She would have had permanent kidney damage.
They freak out at the ER. They go, oh, your pee is going back up through your body. You could have died.
Yeah.
So she starts talking about how awful lipo is. And she's like, I've talked to a lot of doctors and it turns out a lot of them think like lipo is really dangerous.
She doesn't even feel like she looked different after all that. And then she wanted plastic surgery. And so she goes to a couple different places and says, will you do it for free if I get it written up in a lot of magazines, if I do it for publicity? So she does. She goes and gets for free more lipo on her arms.
Upper eye job, lower facelift, lipo on her arms, and then a neck pull, veneers and Botox and other stuff. Ay.
She says it backfired because now people only want to talk about her plastic surgery. And she wishes she had just paid for it and kept it more on the down low.
And of course, it's the only time she gets her Oprah interview.
She finally gets on Oprah to talk about plastic surgery. This is what you're saying. At the end of the day, it really is her desire for fame and attention above all else, because I feel like to have nearly died from liposuction and then get more lipo,
and especially be like, and it didn't even change anything,
is very scary to me. I don't know. I'm really afraid of surgery. And I, again, think it's fine to get surgery, but I don't think it's okay to act like it's not real.
Every time you go under, it's like a big deal.
Yeah.
Okay, so unfortunately, 2000s, Suddenly Susan, off the air. She thinks she's hot shit. She doesn't think she's hot shit, but she's like, I'm coming off of a major network sitcom.
They tell her she's hot shit. All of her agents and everyone is like, this is it. This is going to be your moment. We're going to get you a sitcom of your own. So she has a bunch of meetings and they're all like, oh my God, yeah, no, we would never give you a sitcom of your own.
They're like, you're so old and nobody even likes you. And she's like, isn't that kind of like the cool thing now to get somebody unlikable? I'm the most unlikable person in the world.
She ends up getting a talk show on MTV about reality TV because reality TV was starting to pop off.
Yeah, it was like the era of Survivor and American Idol, and nobody was doing sitcoms anymore because they're like, well, for cheaper and higher ratings, we could just do these reality shows. And so she goes, well, what about a concept that's like me talking about reality shows?
I will say this was just ahead of its time.
Yeah.
She says it only got 6 episodes, and she says it was just ahead of its time, and I completely agree with her. I think that there's no reason that show wouldn't have gone for like 10 years had it started 2 years later.
I mean, isn't that the Joel McHale?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the soup. That's what they do with the YouTube on that Rob Dyrdek.
It's like Andy Cohen's whole career.
I mean, it really is almost 50% of the podcasts.
Yeah.
One of my favorite things to do on the MTV show was to read aloud my hate mail as a way of doing the opposite of what Oprah would do, offering testimonials as to some episode she did changed lives.
She also starts a regular comedy show at the Laugh Factory and starts doing a lot more stand-up.
And she does come up again. She's like, what you have to do in this industry is make your own work. So she creates this weekly show where she essentially does her TV show, but live. And she like records all the TV and then she like has a clicker in her hand and she presses play and then she'll make fun of it to the audience and then she presses play. And she says they start really becoming a hit and like the gays come out and the girls with their boyfriends come out. She starts blowing the light. She's supposed to do a 1 hour show. She's doing 2.5 hour shows and it gets like a 6-month extension. Like it's a real to do.
Then there was some bigwigs that came to her show, like network executives, and they say, you should have your own sitcom. Then she gets wrapped up in development hell again. And finally, she pitches her own reality show. They're like, we want you to do a reality show. And she's like, that makes no sense. And then finally it hits her that her medium level of fame is the story.
And that's when she comes up with My Life on the D List. She talks about that year she's doing her show and how it's selling out and it's doing great. I was in a strangely great position. I had nothing to lose and sold out audiences that couldn't be shocked were eager to hear me report every week on Hollywood crazy people. That is like the dream. The idea that you can sell out a show and just say whatever you want with no consequences.
It's amazing.
At one point she gets a death threat and she's like, okay, I shouldn't tell anybody. And then of course, within 5 minutes, she tells everybody she has a death threat. If you're at my show, I don't want to know where you're from. Keep that shit to yourself. I have things to talk about, like my very special death threat. And that was a unique topic those particular audiences weren't going to hear anywhere else except my pretty little mouth.
That's the thing is she will talk about anything.
As long as it's honest and true.
Yeah. But that's the thing that gets her is that she will talk about anything. And the problem is networks don't actually want someone who will say anything and everything. They want Jimmy Kimmel.
She also talks about the weird change of the guard when reality TV became the thing. She says, I found myself waiting in line with Lisa Kudrow and Ray Romano to get a chance to talk to The Bachelor's new star, Alex Michael. I turned to Ray and said, what is happening to us? I promised my wife I'd talk to him, he said sheepishly.
They put together My Life on the D List. It's a real ragtag operation.
They wouldn't give her anything. She's like, can I have a billboard? Can I have a write-up in People magazine? And they're like, no. And then they also wouldn't even tell her when it would air. So she would go on talk shows to promote it and be like, it's in June or July, possibly fall. She has this funny moment where she wants to call Joe Simpson, Jessica Simpson's dad, to ask about the production of Newlyweds. He never got back to me, as if I needed any more proof of my show concept. When Joe Simpson is too big to return your call, you know your D-list. That's funny.
That is really funny. She's also very honest about the reality of filming a reality show with the actual people in your life, the way that there are so many people you don't think actually care about showbiz or fame or whatever, who just change on a dime as soon as there are cameras in the room. She says she had quiet, sweet friends who suddenly got really intense and mean. She had loud friends who would get very quiet.
She also had a lot of people who felt entitled to be on the show. She had everybody in her life she had ever met would call her up and be like, well, why can't I be on it? And she's like, I haven't seen you in 3 years. And they filmed for 6 months to get 6 episodes. So people would be like, well, why was my scene cut? And she was like, we hung out once. We got lunch one time in 6 months.
So she didn't have any say over the edit. She had no interest in being a part of that. She said that they were professionals. They knew what they were doing. So when people also came to her to say, why was I cut? She was like, I wasn't doing that.
She also didn't want her own vanity to hold up the comedy of it all. She didn't want to say, well, drop that shot. I don't like the way my cellulite looks, which I understand.
Yeah.
It can be tough looking at yourself on camera.
The hardest part of doing any of our own editing. Sometimes I'll be making clips and I'm just like, okay, well, my face looks too weird here.
She also feels very resentful, and I think rightfully so, of the people who just wanted to use her. She goes, what they wanted was to be famous without doing any of the work that I had done. Training, going out acting school, years of rejection, countless open mic nights, all the other stuff. So it finally premieres in August 2005, and the ratings were terrible. I mean, I wasn't expecting Project Runway numbers, but they weren't even a fraction of that.
But then she runs into Brad Garrett from Everybody Loves Raymond, and he's like, congratulations on your show. This is crazy. And she's like, what do you mean? And apparently everyone in Hollywood was watching it.
So then she goes on to her marriage. And it's funny because at one point she goes, my husband, and she goes, what? I'm married? Don't worry, I'll get to that later. And she gets to it. So basically she meets this man. And the deal is this. She, in her flush years of being on Suddenly Susan, wants to rent out this giant house in the south of France and just have people come and go. And I think that's a fantasy. Like, we'll just spend 6 weeks out there just cooking and laughing and getting vulnerable. And everybody kind of ditches last minute.
It turns out a lot of people don't have the freedom to just like swing by the south of France for a bit. And also, unfortunately, I do think Kathy Griffin is a lot of people's most annoying sometimes friend.
She says that everyone she's friends with is on her payroll. But that's because she wants to hire people she likes, not that the people that she pays have to like her.
Yeah, like if you look at the people she was friends with in her early comedy days, I agree that fame makes people grow apart, especially when you're really grinding it out in that way. It's hard to keep in touch with people, but you come back together, you make time for people.
You all live in the same 2 cities. Every single person you've ever met doing comedy that you came up with lives in the same 2 cities and performs at the same 3 or 4 venues. I'm sorry, Chris Rock is at the Comedy Cellar regularly.
Yeah.
Who's more famous than that?
I just think the fact that Conan doesn't want to book her, the fact that Jack Black won't even say hi to her on a red carpet, that to me was so telling. Because even if you had a weird breakup or like a weird interaction with someone.
She says, when I say we dated, we had sex like 2 or 3 times.
Right. But to not say hi to someone.
Yeah.
I saw someone at a concert the other day that I had sex with 2 times and we talked for a minute.
But it hasn't been 25 years yet.
It's been 3. We had no relationship other than, like, you know what I mean? I just feel like to not say hi to someone on a red carpet. I know we're not famous, but think about how stressful big events are and how excited we are to see anyone we like know for real in those rooms. So if you knew someone in your early 20s that you ran into on a red carpet, wouldn't you be like, cool, happy to see you?
I guess he was not happy to see her.
Exactly. What I'm saying is it seems that she's quite annoying.
Anyway, so she runs into this woman who like edited on the Paramount lot. So someone she basically doesn't know but had met and says, hey, listen, I'm going to be in the south of France. And she goes, oh, I have a film at the Cannes Film Festival. I'll come down with my friends. So she imports a group of friends. And one night she's complaining about how there's no one to date. And she goes, oh, you should meet my brother. He's smart, funny, great, just lost a ton of weight. So he's like reinventing himself. And I bet he moves out to LA soon. And Kathy's like, no, but sure enough, they meet. They kind of hit it off. They go on a couple of weekends here and there. And then ultimately he goes, you know what? I'm going to move to LA. And they start dating.
So it turns out he was 10 years younger than her. And when they first met, they had this weird sort of interaction where they would go on these dates when she visited him in DC. She was working in New York at the time, so he visited her in New York. And then he had kind of a breakdown at dinner where he was like, I can't pay for this dinner. And she was like, oh, it's actually totally fine. You're 28 years old. I'm a decade older than you. I'll pay for stuff when I want to do expensive stuff. And when you pick the restaurant, let's just go somewhere chill.
And she talks a lot about trying to date as a successful woman who like has settled and made a name for herself and bought her own house and bought her own nice car and also is on the road all the time. And she kind of liked this idea like, well, I have the money, but you love me unconditionally and we'll make it work. And every relationship is different. And if the roles were reversed,
it wouldn't be weird. Best of all, Matt had a great attitude about Hollywood. He got a kick out of it, but wasn't overly impressed by it either. It's a unique quality that I'd been hoping to find in a partner.
So they end up getting married, but first Brooke Shields throws her a bridal shower and she shows up and it's literally Brooke Shields, Kathy Griffin, Kathy's mom and Kathy's assistant. And she goes, what, like no one else would come? And Brooke goes, no, everyone I invited couldn't make it. And Kathy's like, Brooke Shields called people on the phone and said, can you come to this event I'm throwing? And they said no. And I'm like, wow, people don't like you.
Yeah, I really respect Kathy. I
think she might be a lot to know.
She might be hard to know. And I think people don't really like that.
She really didn't want to have a big wedding. She says that she's always like fantasized about her career and never depending on a man. And her parents were very supportive of that, which I thought was sweet. They used to say to her, you want a guy who's going to be able to handle your career, who knows that work comes first.
So she gets married. This I felt like was a red flag on her part. She decides as a bit to just get her wedding sponsored like crazy.
And donate the money she would have spent on a wedding to a charity, which is sweet. But like, you can tell that she was going in being like, LOL, isn't this funny? Isn't this funny that I'm getting married?
Yeah. So she has Brooke Shields as her maid of honor because she's like, it's great publicity, you see. But I think she just didn't have anyone to ask.
Yeah. So she had people there. And the first few years of married life, she says they were great. He was working at different jobs. And she says that in retrospect, there were red flags. Like he was always leaving jobs and saying those jobs are terrible work environments, but then he'd find his own. And then one day he goes, well, I want to do my own IT consulting. And she says, okay, I'll give you 1 year. I'll fully fund it. I'll give you the basement, like start your own career.
Yeah. And so he has no money and she can't really figure out why. He could never seem to amass any kind of savings. Sometimes he'd get mad that being on the road with me didn't allow him to service his clients properly. But she is like, if he has some money, he has no expenses. I'm funding everything. I pay for our house. I pay for our travel. I pay for everything. So if he has like 2 clients, why can't he just make a car payment?
Something isn't adding up. And then she says, one afternoon, a phone call from my accountant changed everything. So they're shooting the D-list and she gets a call saying, hey, did you just like withdraw this amount of money from this ATM? And she's like, I almost never go to ATMs. And he goes, okay, because I've been looking at your receipts and over the course of the last 6 months, somebody has taken out $75,000 from this one ATM almost systematically where they take your 2 debit cards, they take out $1,500 at the same time every 2 weeks. She's like, okay, well, only 2 people have access to my ATM and PIN, and it would be my assistant and my husband.
So she asks her assistant and her assistant freaks out and is like, oh my God, no, I would never. This like is crazy. I'll help you find out whoever did it. This is so scary. And she's like, well, that's exactly what you would say if you didn't do it.
Yeah. She's like, I feel like she's innocent. And then she asks her husband and the husband goes, no, of course not. That's so awful. And then she goes, by the way, they're going to review the footage so that I can see who's been going to the ATM and taking all this money from me. And he goes, okay, it was me.
And so she freaks out about not even that he took so much money, but the fact that he had this little routine and was initially lying to her.
And it turned out he had never had clients. And she's like, well, what do you do all day? And he goes, I just drive around and go to the movies and go to drive-thrus. Because that's the other thing. They got married and he put on 100 pounds immediately. And she was like, I was always saying, are you okay? It's not that I'm not attracted to you and that I don't love you, but like to within 2 years put on 100 pounds, it seems like maybe you're stressed or upset. You have to be honest about how you're feeling.
And she finds out that, first of all, he just spent all the money. Like there was no rhyme or reason for any of it. I thought there was going to be a gambling addiction or something.
I don't know that she ever got to the bottom of what's going on because all of this, like, well, what caused all of this?
Yeah. So he was just lying constantly. He was lying about his jobs. He was lying about the money. He was lying about little lies all the time. She starts noticing these little things. He'd say like, oh, I talked to our friend Joe the other day. He says hi. And then she'd run into him and be like, oh, I heard you talked to my husband. And he'd be like, I haven't talked to him in 6 months.
And so they go to therapy and they're trying to work it out for like a year. And whenever he's asked about it, he's just like, I don't know why I did it. I'm so sorry. I don't know why I did it. And he agrees to go to Overeaters Anonymous and Debtors Anonymous. And he gets obsessed with losing weight. And again, he loses the 100 pounds like that. Like he's bringing his own steamed broccoli everywhere. But then she finds out he's never even gone to Debtors Anonymous. And that was another lie. And finally, her attorney goes, I have to tell you because I represent you. You need to get out of this because this time it was $75K, but next time it could be $500,000. And at that point, it's your own fault because you knew what was going on. So they end up getting a divorce, but still are trying to work it out. Because like legally, she has to protect herself. It's a 50-50 state.
Yeah. So she divorces him, but they're still dating. And then finally, they hit a point where he just says, I don't want to work it out anymore. I don't love you anymore. And she says ultimately that was the best thing that could have happened to her because she might have kept trying to work it out. And she needed out of this relationship.
It's this very quality of never accepting defeat, going against the odds, and not always listening to reason that while serving me so well in my career has screwed me over in my love life. And she's like, I'd love to say I had a Stella got her groove back where I like yelled at him and then turned it around. But she's like, I don't know. He left me after giving him a year of chances. He just kept lying to me and then he left me. And she went on Larry King Live and talked about it because she was like, maybe a better woman would have taken this to her grave. But the narrative publicly was that I beat this poor man until he couldn't take it anymore. She's just so awful. She's a battle axe. She's so mean. And she's like, I had to tell people that's not what happened. I got fucked over.
I mean, it just is so sad because how do you date as a successful woman? I think as soon as she found someone that felt like a viable option in some way, She just committed to it wholeheartedly and like ignored every red flag.
Well, it's scary too to think like, what did he love? Did he love that he got this easy out from all the mistakes he had made in DC?
Yeah, probably.
So the D-list was nominated for Emmys, and at first she lost, and she's so crazy. So she loses, and she decides to make a huge stink about it.
So she storms out.
The Extreme Makeover folks win, and she goes, "This is bullshit. I was robbed. Get my bag. We got to get out of here." It was very dramatic, especially because my dress had a train that dragged behind me as I stomped off. I could hear 25 people behind me laughing their asses off. And she goes, "Later, I ran into one of the people from Extreme Makeover Home Edition who let me know in no uncertain terms that he did not think what I did was gracious. I said, dude, I was kidding. How could you not know something so over the top like that was a joke? It was then that I learned how little sense of humor Hollywood truly has. So I told the guy to fuck off."
Okay.
You're wrong for that one, Kathy. Relatably, what you're doing is fucked up.
Yeah, her commitment to always entertaining is deeply unlikable, human to human.
The idea that like he can't be mad because you were kidding. Nobody thought you were that indignant that you didn't win. What you were doing was like stealing someone's moment and making it about you, which is exactly what you did.
So then the next year, she has a whole plan for if she loses and a whole plan for if she wins. And she's so honored to be nominated for this award. Like, she can't believe it. She so treasures this experience, but she does not have it in her to like take it seriously for a second.
Or more than that, everything is just collateral to like trade in to go up. So basically, she's like, this is a moment on TV. And again, it's not even the real Emmys. It's what Bravo calls the Shmemmys. It's like the other Emmys.
Creative Arts Emmys.
Yeah. And everything is about notoriety. It's the same game she played in high school trying to get in the yearbook. Just get your name out there and then the opportunities will come. So she says, if I don't win, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run up on stage and start doing my own acceptance speech. And if I do win, she has her friend write this. A lot of people came up here and they thanked Jesus for the award. I want you to know that no one had less to do with this award than Jesus. He didn't help me one bit. If it was up to him, Caesar Milan would be up here with that damn dog. So all I can say is suck it, Jesus. This award is my God now. Which is funny. But also, she literally was like, I'm going to get a huge blowback and it'll all be good for my career.
Yeah. And the thing is, she does care so much about this award, but she won't let herself have that. She needs to make an explosion.
And she says people come against her. Ironically, some religious group paid like $90,000 to get a full page ad out in USA Today to condemn her. And she goes, that's like the biggest ad anyone's bought for me in a newspaper.
Yeah, Bravo doesn't promote her show.
All in all, there really was no downside to my funny little Emmy outburst. Although I was scheduled to film a commercial for DirecTV and they called me to rescind the offer. They actually offered to give me a kill fee, but they wanted me to sign a confidentiality agreement. I'll whore myself out, but I won't censor myself, and especially not in writing. It's compulsive. I mean, there is something wrong with her.
Yeah.
I see it with like Caroline Calloway. Like, some people are meant to be famous in the sense that like they really do think all press is good press. And it's not human.
No. And they just like have lost touch with what people connected with in the first place sometimes, I think.
Because the prestige means so much to her, but not as much as potentially upping
her profile.
Yeah.
So then her dad goes into heart failure. He starts having some pretty serious health issues. He is 90 at this point.
But he and her mother had been like regulars on the D-list. They had been co-stars with her. And it really becomes a problem in their family where they don't know how to film around him. They don't want to address it spot on, but they also can't just have him disappear. And her mom starts getting very resentful about how much Kathy has to travel when she should be home with their dad at the end of his life.
And this goes back to her conversation about grief and how people grieve differently earlier. She says, my dad was a workhorse. He would have liked this about me. And I think this is how she's grieving. This is how she's processing it, is through work, because everything to her is in terms through more work and more success and continuing to grind. She says her dad worked his ass off for years. His last words to her were about hopefully doing Shea Stadium someday. I don't know. This is just how she dealt with it.
And it's interesting because her parents loved being on the show. And her dad actually went on to have a pretty successful commercial career after Kathy got her start. And the mom didn't want them to keep doing the D-list. She was like, how do we go on? I think everyone should stop. But I think the TV show, they did a really beautiful montage in honor of the father that I think everybody appreciated. And I guess in some ways because of that show, they had so many hours of his interview that they could live through.
Yeah. Then she tries to explain her moral line as someone who talks about celebrity.
So she talks about a big thing that she got in trouble for. And she had gone out to do the Oscars red carpet. And her little bit, she didn't want to ask about fashion because she doesn't know about fashion. And she goes, I'm just going to ask funny questions and silly questions. So she starts this bit saying that Dakota Fanning is in rehab. Dakota at this point is 10 years old.
Yeah, celebrities used to always do this thing where the celebrity red carpet interviewer would say, like, do you have any words for so-and-so as they're going through XYZ? So she decides to invent a thing for them to have words for, and then it would all cut together as celebrities like wishing Dakota Fanning good luck in rehab. And Kathy is insistent that it's so ridiculous for 10-year-old Dakota Fanning to be in rehab, so why would anyone care about that?
And I think more than that, Dakota is so considered like precocious and serious and darling and bright-faced.
Yeah.
And then she gets a lot of blowback from Steven Spielberg, and their explanation is, well, she's about to come out in the War of the Worlds, and what if this hurts our box office?
Yeah, but also she is just wrong for that. I guess in the fucking wake of Drew Barrymore going to rehab at 11.
See, I guess that's my problem, is listening to these people who would happily employ a pedophile, these people who are sitting next to Harvey Weinstein, act all up in arms about a joke. I get that she's a kid, but you guys are the ones who made her an adult by employing and exploiting her. Listen, is it great that she made that joke? No, but like, I think if I were to write down a list of people who are exploiting and harming children, this joke is the fucking least of it. There's a lot of kids she's not making fun of, and they're the ones who have not been used as a money-making machine. And I do think they're more concerned about their bottom line. And she says, agents came out to me and said, if only you had made fun of Haley Joel Osment because his career is dead.
I guess I don't agree with her joke. I think it was in poor taste because these are exploited children. When she's explaining her hard line earlier of like not making fun of anyone who's in legitimate danger and legitimate trouble, I believe all child stars are in legitimate danger. So I think that she actually crossed her own line and doesn't realize that she did. That being said, I think the people that she heard from about it are not the people who have any sort of leg to stand on.
I mean, Steven Spielberg, did he not direct E.T.?
Exactly. I think that the joke, I don't agree with this bit that she was doing because I think it's entirely possible that Dakota Fanning was a drug addict behind. Like, I know she wasn't, but I also don't know that she wasn't. I don't know. That being said, I think the people who came for Kathy Griffin, the people who made her feel bad about herself, and the people who were bitches about it were not the people who should have been talking. So I think everyone's wrong.
Yeah. She thinks it's ridiculous. And it also seems like it had no fucking impact on her whole career because then she was doing something else for Vogue and they just put her on a bridge where she can't be near celebrities, but she's still on TV.
Yeah.
Then she talks about Anna Nicole Smith and how, of course, she's going to make fun of her, but not once she died. That's too far. And she's like, I knew her. It's not fun for me to get into a screaming match with Omarosa. And even if I wanted to, I'm not sure that I could track down her crazy ass at this point. I think she's in the White House.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard because she does this whole thing about like, of course I have to make fun of Britney Spears. She's so fucking stupid.
I didn't like her that much in this chapter because the line that she invented for herself is really just to help her sleep at night. It's not for the good of anyone or anything because I also don't believe this line. Like, I think that if she truly thought that she could have a bombastic moment about someone that she deems off limits, she would do it.
Yeah, a lot of her thing is about like when you'll lose the audience. And she goes, the audience can't believe I won't talk about Anna Nicole Smith the day she died, but I would lose them in 2 minutes.
Exactly. It's not about Anna Nicole Smith or respect for anyone or anything. It's about putting on a good show. And I do think people need to have a line.
When it's successful is like when she's like punching up.
Yes.
I mean, the idea that Joe Simpson won't call her back is so funny. But then again, when she's sitting there going, can you believe they didn't think it was funny that I stole their Emmy moment from them? And it's like, no, that's like reasonable.
Yeah. And I think that this chapter was interesting because people have that feeling about us. They'll say we're catty bitches who will make fun of anyone and anything. And that is very much not true. We really try our hardest to be respectful and compassionate and also laugh at a lot of the more ridiculous moments of celebrity and the way people view themselves and like the grandiose fucking noggin on some of these people in the way they write about themselves.
And then, I mean, she talks about laughing about cancer and HIV, and she's like, I would go and do these like HIV shows where they didn't want to hear me talk about how boys and girls are different. They needed to like hear jokes about the shit they were going through.
Yeah.
That they needed like serious comedy that would talk about what was happening. The weird thing about this chapter is, so Spielberg comes out and I guess he says to the New York Post, like, I'm very upset with Kathy Griffin. And then she lives in fear of him. And years later, she runs into him backstage at a Jerry Seinfeld show. And she goes up to Jerry Seinfeld and goes, how could you ask me to meet him? Like, you know, he has it out for me. And Jerry's like, no, that actually did not cross my radar at all. I do not care who you fight. You fight with everybody. You think in my giant career, I even noticed who you're fighting with that day, which I think is very funny and true.
Yeah.
But I was like, also, Kathy, do you think Steven Spielberg, I don't think he cares about you at all.
No, he was trying to make sure no one affected his War of the Worlds weekend one box office numbers. And now that that movie is out and successful, he doesn't give a fuck.
So then she has a chapter about the fact that she dated Steve Wozniak, who's the co-founder of Apple and a billionaire. It's all done via email. And I said, I don't care.
I really don't care. They both seem like kooks. I'm glad they matched each other's freak for but a moment.
You could feel that it was so important. I think after her divorce from her husband to be like, a rich man would like me too. Like,
yeah.
I feel like so much of this was look at our funny rapport. And then I saw online, I just looked it up. I guess they didn't even ever have sex. So they didn't really date. He just was a fan of hers. And they kind of had this flirty, platonic, fun little email back and forth. And they met a few times. He got a real kick out of her. And like, that's so important to her, that kind of male approval from somebody successful.
Yeah.
And then she has How Paris Hilton Changed My Life.
She went on Paris Hilton's show, My New BFF. Paris Hilton came on the D-List show for a cameo.
And Paris bought Kathy a Poochie bikini and said, oh, you have to put it on. And she goes, I can't put it on. And then she goes, fine, for the humor of how disgusting and awful I'll look in this bikini next to Paris Hilton, I'll put it on for the gag because I have to commit to the bit. And sure enough, photos go viral and people go, oh, she has a great body. And then she becomes known for her bikini bod. And it is funny because before she reveals that it all works out in her favor, I'm looking at this photo and she looks so tiny in it. And I'm like, okay, I don't really think it's as funny as you think it is. You just look like a very fit small person in a bathing suit.
Yeah. And so then all of a sudden she's getting asked to do all these magazine spreads about bikinis and having a bikini body and blah, blah, blah. They call it a bikini bod. It really is just her. I think this chapter is about her being very proud of herself.
I mean, it ends on this. The grand conclusion of her life is it turns out she does have a good body.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, telling. And then she has her epilogue.
It's funny because she really does just sum up the way we sum things up. It's a little strange to look back so thoroughly on my life and realize I haven't learned one lesson. Talk about can't learn a lesson disease. She's like, I told Jesus to suck it and everyone got mad at me. And then I made fun of Dakota Fanning and everyone got mad at me. You know, all these reasons that people got so pissed at me. And then she goes on to do that Donald Trump thing that got her more canceled than anything so far.
But I think she's doing great. I think she's fine.
I think she's doing a world tour right now.
Anyway, how many worm-teenies would you like to have with her? I guess she would have 0 with you because she's sober, a lifelong sob, but...
A lifelong sob, but I would like to have 3 with her because I am just interested in talking comedy with her.
Kathy, we would actually love to have you on the pod if you're listening.
Yeah, we would. That'd be so cool. I am interested in talking to her. I know I called her annoying a bunch, but I meant it in a way that was strictly diagnostic.
Yeah, no, I'm like really like this book and I really liked her and I'm deeply interested in talking to her about gossip and the industry and the shiz.
The shiz, totally. Claire, how fertile would you consider this soil?
I'm going to give it like a 4.
I think it started out really great and there are a couple incredible chapters.
But I would say for the average person, a 3.25. You know, this is how I feel, I think, when maybe some people read like their favorite musician's book. It was so relevant to my interests. I found it to be so honest in things that like I feel frustrated about. It truly did feel like for me having a really good vent sesh with like a contemporary. Plus there was other interesting bits and bobs here.
It was also inspiring about how we need to just keep on trucking.
Yeah. For me, it's a 4. I would say for most people, it's one of the better comedian memoirs. I mean, it's not Molly Shannon level, but I mean, it's 2009, it's 15 years later, and I think it's really held up. She is somebody with like a funny perspective on life and not somebody who's just trying to like do some hackery.
Yeah. I know she got famous talking about celebrities and gossiping about celebrities, but I think that when she does let herself earnestly ruminate on topics, she does have interesting thoughts and ideas.
Yeah.
And I wonder what would happen if she explored that more.
She talks about all these talk show hosts she was banned from and even talking about that in her book. And she goes, at the end of the day, it'd be safer for me to make fun of the president because these are the people that hold my career in their hands. And less so now. But at the time, late night shows were where careers were made in braid. And I think it's like something compulsive in her that's a mental disorder that many people, if she had just become an IT guy in Ohio, they would have said, you need to work on this. In any other industry, it'd make her unemployable and ill. But I admire it and I am happy that she's in the industry she's in because I am like, I don't know, she's just being honest.
When there's a story to tell, I admire that she's willing to tell it and name every name. When there is no story to tell, she just wants to say that she knows famous people. The Steve Wozniak chapter,
I would say that's a standalone.
Right, but there are other stories within some of the stories where I was like, oh, you just saying that you met a famous person here is not even that interesting.
Yeah, but that's just to you because you have like a blasé thing that's really held us back in life.
Totally. Okay, well, do you know who I'm not blasé about?
your 5-star reviewers.
I love our 5-star reviewers.